Hi everyone, welcome. Please continue to help yourselves to food and coffee in the back at any time. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Katina Rogers. I'm Deputy Director of the Futures Initiative in Haystack at CUNY. Just joined the Graduate Center last month, and I'm delighted that the Futures Initiative is partnering today with the library and Just Publics at 365 for today's discussion of digital platforms and multimedia scholarship. On behalf of all of us, I'd like to welcome everyone who's here in person, as well as everyone who's following us on the live stream or on Twitter at the Remix Scalar hashtag. At the Futures Initiative in Haystack at CUNY, my colleagues and I are working to create, inspire, and showcase innovative methods of research and pedagogy, both here within the CUNY system and in the broader higher education landscape. Through public events like this one, as well as open working sessions, courses, and research on academic labor, we hope to explore new models for empowering the next generation of intellectual leaders as they teach and engage in research as effectively as possible in our modern age. We're especially excited to be offering a course this spring at the Graduate Center called Mapping the Futures of Higher Education. For those of you here in person, there are course descriptions and some information about that course at each seat. The course will be co-taught by Futures Initiative Director Kathy Davidson and former President and Interim Chancellor Bill Kelly. It's multidisciplinary, and it will be exploring the roles of equity and innovation in public education in the U.S. Doctoral students in the course will be putting new pedagogical and institutional ideas into practice in their own teaching on the CUNY campuses. Their undergraduates will be included as co-learners in the project, contributing their ideas and feedback via course websites that will connect them all to one another. And as a final project across all of the courses, we'll be designing and populating a collaborative, online, public CUNY map of New York, designed to visualize what college offers to the community and vice versa. I'd like to take a moment to thank my colleagues Lauren Melendez and Kathy Davidson, who regrets that she can't be here today, as well as our extremely talented and dedicated graduate fellows, Michael Dorsch, Danica Savanek, Lisa Taliaferri, and Kalea Westerling, all of whom are here today. And I'd also like to thank Sean Smith, who's working with the Futures Initiative as an embedded librarian. All of these people have been doing such hard work, both for today's event and to put together this program as a whole. I invite everybody to learn more about what we're doing at futuresinitiative.org. Last month, we co-sponsored a panel called What is a Dissertation that highlighted the incredibly creative work of 5 emerging scholars. We look forward to extending and expanding that conversation about new modes of scholarly communication today through the demo and discussion. It's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Jessie Daniels. Jessie is Professor of Public Health, Sociology, and Psychology at the Graduate Center and at Hunter College, and is co-director of Just Publics at 365 along with Polly Thistle. An internationally recognized expert on internet manifestations of racism, Jessie is the author of 2 books about race and various forms of media called White Lies and Cyber Racism, as well as dozens of peer-reviewed articles. From 1995 to 99, Daniels taught sociology at Hofstra University, then left academia to work in the internet industry, where she worked as senior producer creating live online events for Fortune 500 companies. She came back into academia through an NIH-funded research project at Rikers Island, New York City's largest jail, that explored the role of masculinity and race in promoting health for young men leaving jail and re-entering their communities. Since 2007, Daniels has maintained a scholarly blog called Racism Review, which regularly gets 200,000 unique visitors every month and has received well over 2 million visitors since it began. Her current work focuses on the ways that race, gender, sexuality, and political economy influence feminist blogging. A recent piece about this research appears in the edited volume Cyber Feminism 2.0. She was awarded an Andrew W. Mellon Fellowship for 2012-2013, and Forbes magazine recently named her one of 20 inspiring women to follow on Twitter. You can find her on Twitter at JessieNYC, which I highly recommend. I'm delighted that she'll be moderating today's discussion.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Katina, and thanks to the Futures Initiative, the GC Library, and Haystack for co-sponsoring this. At this moment in time, we hold our collective breath, waiting for social justice for Michael Brown and Eric Garner killed by police violence, and for so many more killed by structural violence. As we wait, At the same time, new forms of activism against these injustices emerge. And alongside them, new questions arise about what is our scholarship for? What purpose does it serve? And can it serve the goals of social justice? Are new modes of knowledge production also potentially new modes of achieving social justice? Tara McPherson has now famously called for the need for critical race coders, people who are doing the important work of reimagining the kinds of tools that we use in this work. Alexis Lothian and Amanda Phillips, in their 2013 piece, Can Digital Humanities Be Transformative Critique, ask if the new tools and methods of digital humanities can take up new positions of prominence that also take on mutations and instabilities represented by the practitioners and projects which are speaking to social justice. I want to raise these questions as we begin this talk about these wonderful new tools and the potential that they raise, so that we might, in Lothian's and Phillips' terms, hope for a community at large that will continue to find and create work that is anti-racist, such as queer art theories, collaborative feminist pedagogies, crunk academic activisms, critical race coders, and find ways to make this work both new and transformative in terms of social justice. So with those opening remarks, and I hope setting the tone for some questions which you'll all have to follow these presentations about new tools, I want to introduce our speakers today. First up is Diana Taylor, who is University President and Professor of Performance Studies and Spanish at NYU. She's the author of the award-winning Theater of Crisis, Drama and Politics in Latin America, and Disappearing Acts, Spectacles of Gender and Nationalism in Argentina's Dirty War, as well as The Archive and the Repertoire, Performing Cultural Memory in the Americas, which won the Outstanding Book Award from the Association of Theater and Higher Education, and the Catherine Singer Kovacs Prize for Best Book in Latin America and Hispanic Studies from the Modern Language Association. Diana Taylor has also authored several books in Spanish, including Performance in Editorial Asuntos Impresos, Argentina, 2012, Acciones de Memoria, and in Peru, 2012. She's edited over a dozen print books, 3 digital books, and has lectured extensively around the world. Diana is the recipient of many awards and fellowships, including the Guggenheim Fellowship in 2005, Phi Beta Kappa Visiting Scholar, 2012 to 13, and the 2013-14 ACLS Digital Innovation Fellowship. She's founding director of the Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics, funded by the Ford, Mellon, Rockefeller Brothers, and Henry Luce Foundations. And her co-presenter today is Alexei Taylor, who is a web developer, designer, and programmer who has worked mostly in the commercial sector developing apps and websites. He's also worked for 10 years with graduate and undergraduate students both at NYU and our own UNCC, so a CUNY colleague as well. Alexei combines interest in tech and pedagogy to find new ways of teaching and learning that focus on the community and network aspects of technology instead of the old school linear teacher to student structure. Lexi finds that students today have a vastly different outlook to learning, reading, and writing than they did just 5 years ago, and our approach to teaching and writing needs to acknowledge these new habits. Collaborative writing with rich media has legitimate value, he says, but is slow to be recognized, supported, and understood by the governing institutions. So I'm going to turn it over to Diana. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you. So we're going to keep this really informal, and we're just going to go back and forth, and so I guess if people want to talk at any point or ask questions, feel free. So the first thing we wanted to do was, aside from talking about the different platforms, is sort of frame them within a couple of big questions. And the first question we have up here is, what is a digital book? And so this is something that we have actually been working together on for, it's really, we did the math and it's like 14 years, so it's even longer. But in 2000, we began working in the days of Flash, working with scholars to think about how we can get their materials online and take advantage of the different kinds of tools available, video, which was very much in its infancy then, streaming video, that is, and animation and photography and other types of sort of coded effects that you can do, interactivity. And so the first thing we did, and we weren't calling these books at the time, that wasn't even sort of on the radar, right? These were just get your stuff up online, make sure it works, hopefully people can see it and understand how to use it, kind of a thing. And I'm going to just skip back and forth because I have a couple of these online. These were called web cuadernos, and I'm going to bring up the page. Can you see this sort of? Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these and how we approach them?
Yeah, so I mean, these are all kinds of different. These are all kinds of different projects that we developed at the very beginning of what now we would call digital publication. Lex, can you take us back to the web program? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that, as somebody, I'm a professor of performance studies, so we needed, I felt, as a field, as scholars, to have access to video, access to information and materials about these performances that were happening in the Americas. We didn't have a way of doing it back in this early stage. And so what we did was really try, let's show this one maybe. What we were trying to do was to use the technologies that we had to make these notebooks, digital notebooks, is all we aspired to back then, available to people. So these are already multilingual. This is a group from Cuba, a dance group from Cuba, and we had videos, and we had interviews, and we had photographs, and all this kind of work. But one of the things at that moment, I don't know if anybody remembers, the beginning of the 2000s in the digital world, that everything had to be flashier and faster and all of this. And we were trying to make things available so that people could, if they had access to computers in Cuba, which some of our colleagues did, but also in Brazil or in Bolivia or other places, be able to watch it. So here, I mean, maybe just show what you did with the technology on this. So how do you watch the video of a performance back in, this was like 2001?
I'm not sure if this one has a whole lot of...
Well, we broke it up.
Oh, we do have some of them.
Yeah, we do, and we broke it up into clips. So you could watch the whole performance, but the clips, and we're going to get back to this question of how do you preserve these things, right? Because now some of the things that were then just commonplace are no longer commonplace. So the expiration date on these projects is pretty limited. Anyway, so we did a whole slew of these books. Notebooks without calling them books. I don't know if you want to say anything more about these.
No, this was our first sort of step into the relationship between scholars and technology, and sort of what was the accumulation of this new sort of project that we're involved in now, which are making these digital books, right? And so the first, let me get back to the slideshow here. Let me go through, these are some of our screens. So these are the web cuadernos. Here's another one.
This is the first one we did.
Right. And then this one, so this had, these were taking, Flash and taking interactivity into sort of a calendar. This one with Guillermo Gomez Peña. So these were sort of what we look at today. This was actually very recently. I don't know if anybody saw this at ASA, the Scholars Under Attack interactive map. So these projects were sort of looking back and saying, well, if we're going to ask a question of what is a book, the impetus of this was all of these non-books that we were creating. We're trying to always struggle. What defines these books? And I think the answer was that we started coming into a relationship where we were creating digital companions, right? To existing books. We were taking the media that couldn't be discussed, we were bringing them in there. And then these digital companions started to turn into born digital books. And so this was something where we started to question, or we started to bring in an argument a scholar's argument became the sort of core foundation for these projects, right? And they were,
Yeah, so one of the things that this,
show this one.
right, so this was our first quote book, and this was a companion to a book I had edited with Duke University Press that I published with since like 1993 or 4. So Duke and I have a long relationship and a very trusting and strong relationship. So we published this book, and then we wanted a companion, because what's the point of having this book on performance when you can't see the performance, and you can't have interviews, and you can't bring it up to date with newer performances and all of that. So I talked to Ken Wissaker, and he was all amenable for us to do the digital companion. So we had the digital companion, and then we weren't happy with the digital companion either, because we were, well, what is this? You know, you're looking at it, and you've got some videos, and you've got some interviews, but you don't have any of the core arguments, you don't have any of, you know, it's not a book. So we went back to Duke, and we said, can we put the whole contents of the print book into the digital book? So now you have all of the articles, you have all of the videos, you have all blah, 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 and that's finally what we have now. So every single step, I would say, has been trial and error. We've tried to think about what might make for an interesting book, and then decided that, well, gee, you know, wouldn't it be a lot better if we had all of these other things in place? So that's how this book came about. And these books are also multilingual. So one of the issues, and I think this gets a little bit to Jesse's idea about human rights and social justice issues, is that in the Americas, people don't have access to a lot of print publication. We also have the issues of languages. You have 4 functioning languages that are the colonial languages in the Americas. So you have English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So everything we do is in Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and now we're beginning to introduce French. But then we have a lot of colonial languages. So some of the web cuadernos that you saw are actually in some of the native languages, then with Spanish, and then with English. So the idea of accessibility became a prime issue, in addition to this issue of bandwidth. Who could see it? Where could you see it? People did not own their own computers in Latin America when we started this project. Students, a lot of this was for students, and we had courses online, so we were building the course materials for the courses, and we started with graduate courses with Peru and Mexico and Brazil, and then with me in performance studies. So we had to create the materials, but the students didn't have their own computers, so they'd have to go to an internet cafe. How could you watch it? How could you have chats? How could you have forum? How could you do collaborative projects? So in a way, everything we were doing was trying to push the technology to be able to give us ways to do the kind of work that we were set on doing. So I've always felt that as a scholar, and I am not savvy with technology. Alexei and I have had a good partnership because I know nothing about what he does, and he just makes everything possible. We think out loud, and we think about the issues, and then we find a way to make it happen. But one of the things I think is very important for technology is I think that humanists have to drive the machine. We can't let people who are just interested in the technology design the platforms. And I think that Tara McPherson, of course, Alexei will talk about that more, but has been brilliant in this, right? What is it that the humanists can bring to this debate that then will create the kinds of technology that respond to our concerns and our priorities and our goals. So this became our first book. This will be out soon. These are now going to be published with Duke University Press. We have a series of digital books along with a series, what's that with all
I don't know, I don't know.
I've never seen this before, just a, so
on
this, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so this was our first born digital book. And so it doesn't exist anywhere else. It cannot exist anywhere else. It's built on Scalar. It's multilingual. It's basically a collection of essays revolving around a series of 30 interviews that we have with scholars around the question of what is performance studies. And so we actually started this book as the collection of videos. And we sent it to peer review with Ken, and he comes back and he says, well, this is great, but how is this a book? It's more of a website. And so we start thinking, well, that's a good question, right? What actually makes something a book? And so the idea of a scholarly argument came into play. And so we invited several people, you, of course, being one of them, to write about the collection and feature these collections. And then the way that we tied them together and made this sort of, took advantage of the technology, was we integrated a whole series of tagging. And so what happens is, as you're reading through one of these essays, and you mentioned Richard Schechner, well, there's a link to Richard Schechner. There might even be a step further where Richard Schechner is actually talking about race, for instance. So when you arrive at this tag, it'll take you to Richard Schechner and take you exactly to the place in his transcript where he's talking about race. And of course, you can see the video at the same time. So it's this sort of completely non-linear sort of exploratory environment, though it is grounded in these sort of linear traditional type essays. And a funny story with this was I was presenting this a while back and went through the whole thing and showed all the pages and watched a lot of the videos. I'll show you some of them right now, actually. Here's the tags, for instance. So one way to navigate through this is with this tag view. Let's see here if we can. What is going on with your thing here? There's always something we present. It just,
I know.
Everything's perfect, and then you present it and nothing works, and this will come in. We'll talk about all the pros and cons to publishing, obviously digitally. There's many on both sides. Let's go to the interviews here. Okay, so here are, I think it's plugins, because we just fired up this computer and it's super old, and I think it's missing all the plugins to do anything anybody would ever want.
Always plugins.
Yeah. So here is Daphne Brooks, and you can see the tags. So these are some of the issues that she's talking about. And if you were to click on history, for example, it'll take you to the paragraph where she's talking about history. So this was our first sort of what ended up being a book, right? It started just being a bunch of videos. And then we sort of started to really think and reach across all the different types of tools that were available to us in Scalar. So the data visualizations, which I'll try to show you in some other capacity, but doesn't look like it's showing right now. Obviously streaming video and tags. But the funny story was that I had presented this book and I showed all of these things, and then people were like, look, this is really great, but where's the print button? How do I read this? And it was like, all right, we're really like in a funny place right now, because there's no way to print this. I mean, obviously you can print out the text, you can print out the transcripts, right? But what becomes these books is the way in which you navigate them, and the way in which that actually reinforces the scholarly argument, right? So that's where we sort of come around into trying to understand what these digital books are, and where do we leave them from just being a website to really being something that can, I don't still feel comfortable with the word book, but a publication or something, right? So anyways, this is our first sort of official one. It's 175,000 words long, which is an interesting number, just considering it doesn't really look big, right? You're not carrying it around, but it's a massive volume. There's, I forget how many hours of video, but there's a lot of video, and of course all translated and subtitles. We have subtitles here in any language, so et cetera, et cetera.
And it was interesting because he's had to go through reader reviews, right? Outside reader reviews with Duke. Mm-hmm. And one of them came back and it said, oh, this is such an elegant little book. It's kind of like, reminds me of a pamphlet. And we were like, clutching our hearts, 175,000 words, the amount of labor that has gone into this. Mm-hmm. It was like this elegant little thing, and we're like, oh my God, where are we in this field? Mm-hmm. And can I just say one more thing about what we learned about this?
Yeah, please.
I mean, so as I said, everything has been trial and error. So now, we had all of the interviews in the 3 languages originally. And then we translated them all. And then, of course, we did the transcripts, which were also translated. And then we did the text. And so we had this trilingual thing. Well, then something had to change, and it had to change in the 3 languages. So every time we were dealing with something, we weren't dealing with one thing. We were dealing with these 3 interconnected things. which leads us to the language of tags. So if you're using embodiment in English, which of course we do, you don't have the word for embodiment in Spanish, and you don't have it in Portuguese. So what does that mean about embodiment? We don't need it as a term. You know, they can do without it perfectly in these other languages. So then all these other scholarly questions came up about language and about all of this. Anyway, long story short, one of the things that we've learned from this was we are now creating books in one language, and then we're making them in the 3 languages. We're not building them trilingually from the very beginning anymore because of the just an amount of people hours that it took to create this one book. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, we've gotten really, I think, pretty streamlined now in our publishing process in that we've learned through this, right? Once they were all translated and sent out and transcribed and then translated, we realized reading all the translations that they were completely different, right? That we played this telephone game we had 3 different people translating, and then we had 3 different people transcribing, and then we had 3 other. The point is, by the final that product was completely different from the first. We had to sort of revisit the beginning and think about the process of how you do something like this on such a scale. So very interesting.
And then just one other thing I want to say about this. That book, just to make, just from our point of view, cost $45,000, which was $45,000 we did not have. That's not labor, right? That's not anybody's time. That is, I mean, it is in terms of the translation, in terms of the transcription, in terms of that. But we had just never thought about it, right? We didn't sit down before and say, what would it cost to do one of these? So lots of surprises is all I'm saying along the way.
One thing, we've sort of abandoned our slideshow, but one of the things we're talking about here is Scalar. And I know that that's one of the main thing that platform that we're here to show. These are all Scalar books, and we have a couple that are not. But and the original ones that we showed, the Cuadernos, those were all done with Flash and sort of just your old HTML, basic HTML. There was nothing else. These are all done with Scalar, and just to sort of a brief overview, it's a content management system, so it's like WordPress. Which means you can go in and create a site or a book without any sort of knowledge of coding, right? Scalar also is unique in that it's the first platform really dedicated for scholars to create and to rethink and re-envision their materials online. And what that means when you can create chapters, or what it calls paths, what it means when you can make paths that intersect with one another, right? So you've got various points of interest that overlap in certain areas. You can sort of choose your own adventure, so to say, and move through these materials in completely nonlinear ways. It also takes advantage of tagging and data visualization. So it has a dynamic way of understanding the kinds of materials that you're inputting, the type they are, so what kind of media they are, what their relationship is in terms of to a particular chapter or path, or to a particular tag, and it visualizes this, right? And so it's really, and then of course it also does streaming video, and it also ties into existing archives in a way that's quite novel, so that when you're working with the system and you're authoring a page, you're able to actually pull up a window and search through YouTube or search through HIDVL, Hemi's library. I forget the Smithsonian. There's all kinds of work being done now tying in with all of these new collections, all right? So that you can actually access this work, reference it, so you're featuring it in the website, but it doesn't live in the website. And this is a really interesting thing that Scalar does, and actually it's the model kind of now, which is this access versus ownership model, right? But you can't own the thing, but there's nothing to say you can't watch it, right? You just can't download it and edit it and send it off to all your buddies under some other context, right? But you can access it. And so what Scalar does is it imports media, and that it references the media and shows it. But then it also, what it does actually do is imports all the metadata associated with that. And that metadata then becomes very valuable in that you can search it and you can sort of use that in its own right as part of your scholarly work. Some of the new things with Scalar too that we're working on is to actually re-inject the metadata of the new framework of this material. So if I'm using a video from HIDVL on Jesus Rodriguez and I've featured it in this book called Holy Terrors, well, now what we've done is we've added a new level of metadata that is saying, you know, like a DC featured in type of field that's now featured in Holy Terrors, page 17, all right? Now, when it goes back to the collection, it's now holding on to this new metadata, right? So it's sort of, if you can imagine how these collections of art can show through their metadata how this work is being used, right? It sort of reinforces their need to exist, right? We had 100,000 people featuring this in these digital books, right? That means a lot. So that data is very valuable. So it works a lot with metadata. And it's also, there's a lot of work that we're doing now in sort of thinking about how you can further use metadata as a way to integrate into these digital projects. So Resistance Strategies is a collection of other essays. I'm just going to sort of click one of these. Here's Joan Saab's. So it's got streaming audio. It has videos. I think this one has video. It's got video here. Okay. So these books are media rich and sort of
What's to stop depression and anxiety?
Oh, this is a YouTube ad. So that's what you get when you put things in YouTube and you don't turn off the ad. Yeah, so anyways, this is another one. I'll just keep going here. Okay, you saw a quick screen grab of this, Scholars Under Attack. This was another Scalar project I worked on for the ASA. This was just featured last Friday, I believe. This is another platform. This uses another platform called Mapbox, which is sort of like Google Maps, but it has an interface where you can kind of really customize them. So you can, not just the colors, but the streets, and then you can add information to the pins, right? So this has got a map of the United States and shows these different, there's different categories. So there's academic freedom issues, surveillance of research, police violence, discrimination, and access to education. So we can go here to South Carolina and see here the University of South Carolina Center for Women's and Gender Studies cut after lawmakers condemn queer readings. Okay, so this is an interactive map project. It's not, this was in the category of not book, right? I'm just revisiting this now. Getting into other books, should we talk about Tome and talk about Hemi? So one thing that's interesting, and one thing that Scalar has really raised the question is, what is a book? What does it mean to read online when you have a video and all of a sudden people stop looking at the text and they just watch the video and they're like, okay, I think I got enough, I'm out of here. Right? It's really raised these questions and also looked and brought up the issue of reading habits, not just for scholars, because we can actually now track, with analytics on these books and see exactly how long somebody stays on a page, how many pages they go to, right? What the bounce rate is, right? How fast they've skipped off after just looking at the first page. So it's very interesting to get a sense of really how these things are being absorbed. But so Scalar has raised all these questions. One of the things that we have found in Diana's department and where I've been working for 4 years now is the way that our audience responds. So the Hemispheric Institute is writing predominantly about performance. And so when you're writing about performance, we're really looking to get an immersive environment, right? Something that has full screen video, something that we actually don't need a whole lot of things that deal with data visualizations, right? So a lot of the affordances that Scalar offers, we found that we weren't using. So we developed our own platform, which is a WordPress thing. It's a theme plus some plugins, so called Tome, that's made for really writing about performance.
Can I just start at the beginning with, can I interrupt you for a
Yes,
second
please,
before we do this?
yes.
So I just want to say a little bit about the history of this. So Tara and I started working together, I would say, I don't know, I don't have a good sense of time. I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And one of the things that she wanted to do back then was to be able to pull from archives in the Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics that I direct has these very, very important archives that's called the Digital Video Library that's funded by Mellon. And so we wanted to partner up. So when that happened and they started doing Scalar, what she did was she hired Alexei, who's now the interface developer for Scalar, but she wanted him on the East Coast. And said, there's a lot of scholars here who are using these platforms and want to learn how, or students. And so we made this deal, which is a great deal. And the deal was he would work 25 hours, but if we gave him a space for him to work at the Hemispheric Institute, 12 and a half hours, and that would be for us for free. So 12 and a half hours he works on Scalar-related projects, and 12 and a half hours he works on Hemi-related projects. So we have very different constituencies. So Scalar works predominantly with scholars. At Hemi, we work with scholars, but we also work with artists and with activists. So the things that the artists and the activists wanted were not necessarily the things that the scholars wanted. And so Alexei was dealing with both of these populations and then developed this other platform, which we will see now. This is Tome, and it responded to the things that especially artists were longing for.
Well, and also the fact we've also baked in a multilingual functionality.
Right.
So it's actually a part of the program or the software because we're working with a international community. So this is a project. I'm just going to show you quickly. This is not a non-linear. This is just a traditional linear reading experience. It has chapters. When you finish one, you go on to the next. But it has sort of very large immersive video.
Can you make it larger?
Well, I get the
Okay.
yeah, it's a little. Let's see if this
That's good. No, it's full screen.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Does it play? Does it play?
That's fine. Yeah. Is it?
I don't know. It's playing.
Do we have sound?
I don't know if it's playing. Why is it not playing? It says it's downloading. It's a Vimeo file. Doesn't matter. So this is just a traditional reading experience. It has embedded media, streaming video. There's also, let's see here, it also includes maps. I'm going to show you this little mapping project here. So it has a map plugin. Let's see here if we can get this. Google. So this was an interesting project working with Peter Kolczewski and going up to Baffin Island in northern Canada to work with communities in Cumberland Sound. And so I'm just going to show you a couple of these places. Like here's Iqaluit. So again, another platform that's really thinking about immersiveness and putting you in places, right? So we've got these maps that actually put you on the ground, full screen video, multilinguality. Let's see here, we've got a gallery also. So. Anyway, so that's another
The video again, just in case, because it's so.
Yeah, it's a beautiful video.
I love what that video can do and how it introduces the book, because I'm going to talk about hopefully a book that we're doing now. That's the problem with technology, you know. It is. I was giving a talk way back in the day, and about our website and this fact that the Hemi website was so advanced for its time and so forth, and we had just been hacked. And our whole entire website was down, and I had to give my talk with only the flyer. All I had to show was the flyer that the website had once existed. We were able to get it back. We have many backups. Oh, here it is.
None of the controls work. There it is. Go Firefox.
Pang has a population that's now close to 2,000 people, or maybe slightly over. When I started the program, there were maybe 1,400 to 1,500 people here. We established the school in 1997 after a consultation visit in 1996, and I had been coming to the community, my first trip was 1985. And it was partly the
So an
cultural strength of the community.
interesting part of my role working with creating these digital books is the more that you have video, the more you start to realize half of the book becomes the video, right? Becomes the audio. So now, the scholar here needs to also start thinking about it being a director, right? And you're going to have to film something, and now you need to all these other skills start to come into play. So now you got to learn, videography and photography and editing and so on and so forth, right? So it never ends. One of the interesting things, though, is that when you start to have these tools and you start to really think creatively about how you can pair the multimedia with the text, you start to come up with all these kinds of new ideas that really start to shift the perception of what these digital books are, right? So, for instance, when we started working with this, we started looking at these sort of video headers for each of the pages, right? So each of the chapters, in some way, let's just see, I'll go to one that has it, right? So when you're talking about the handshake, or here, actually, this one's even cooler, the gift of food, right? We actually have video, which is the gift of food. So we've made a video that shows how this is done in Pangnirtung. Well, the video doesn't play on this. Where are we on here?
Talk about how they go and just eat food.
Yeah, well, it's actually funny. You go out on a hunt, so this guy just killed a seal, and then he goes to his uncle's house, and he just takes half the rib cage and leaves it on his floor in the living room, and then walks out. So imagine coming home and finding a half of a seal on the middle of your living on the floor, and that's what you do. And then and if you're a guest, you come by and you take out your knife because you're supposed to carry a knife with you, and you just sit down on the floor next to it and you just cut off some pieces and eat it raw. And anyways, interesting. But so we started integrating all of these, this beautiful videography that we collected up there into the book that Peter had.
Shot, actually.
Yeah, I filmed all of it and learned as I went and edited it. But so we started to think about our next book that we're working on with Jesus Rodriguez, and started to think, well, how do we take this video a step further, right? How come the video itself can't be the table of contents, right? And so this is trying, and some people, like scholars might be just kind of like, oh my God, this is blasphemy. But, not all is lost, because the idea here is thinking about the different kinds of audiences, right? So one thing, to be frank, is that people don't read a whole lot of stuff online. They can, but they got to get hooked first, right? You don't want to just look at a page that's 1 million words long and be like, oh, this looks like I'm going to have a great time starting to read this thing, right? So you need to have a hook, just like in magazines, right? You've got the deck and the lead, and you've got pull quotes, and you've got all this stuff as a way to get you to ease you into reading. So we thought, well, why can't we make a table of contents that's a video? So in a sense, you could watch the video from start to finish and sort of watch the whole book. But the video has been tagged along the way, and it's sort of little things, like YouTube has things like this, where it'll come up with themes. So if you're talking about embodiment at that moment, the little thing will come up. And so whenever you want to read more, you click on this, and the whole chapter comes up, and you've got this, rich, deep, scholarly text that goes on for hundreds of pages, right? But the way that you access it is sort of this pick and choose and through this sort of filtering system, right? So it's, and you can, we've done the same thing with these tag clouds as ways to navigate, right? So it's really starting to rethink what a book is. Another, you were going to say
Well, I
something?
wanted to add, if we're going to talk about that book, but are you going to talk about that book, or are you going to continue with?
I was just about Jesusa?
Yeah.
Please. Yeah.
So with the Jesusa book, which is the one that I got the Digital Innovation Grant for, was really to rethink how to approach this material. Because one of the things, the book is about Jesusa Rodriguez and Liliana Felipe, who are, Jesusa is one of the most famous artists and activists in Mexico. I mean, her stuff is like on the news front page. It's not in the entertainment section. And her wife and partner and everything else of the last 30 years is a very major singer and composer from Argentina, whose sister was disappeared and brother-in-law were disappeared during the Dirty War, and has a lot of her own political activism. Anyway, she moved to Mexico, quote, to be safe, from the dictatorships. And only to find, I don't know if you guys know what's going on in Mexico now, which I will not derail us, but only to find herself in another very terrible, terrible moment. But anyway, so the two of them have done this work for 30 years together. A lot of it has been theater. They did their first Donna Giovanni, which traveled all over Europe and became a very famous piece. They do a lot of cabaret. They had their own cabaret space. First a small one and then another one, The Habit. It was all a takeoff on the church because they will lose no opportunity to take a dig at the Catholic Church. And so that lasted for 15 years, and they do a lot of fabulous cabaret. And then they do a lot of other kinds of performances. Then they've done a huge amount of activism. So during the last elections in 2006, not the last, the 2006 elections in Mexico, when it was really clearly a battle between the right and the left, it was like our Gore-Bush moment, where the popular vote very clearly went to the guy from the left, and the equivalent of the electoral Supreme Court or whoever manages gave it to the right. Anyway, so 50 days, millions of people went to Mexico City and occupied the whole central part of Mexico City, and Jesus curated 3,400 performances during those 50 days of living in tents on the street. So she's done a lot of activism also with indigenous women, with other kinds of course, the gay lesbian communities and lots of other communities. So we have massive amounts of material because we have their entire video collection, but we also have their entire archive. So all of her drawings, all of the drawings for each of the performances, all of the text, everything we have. And the other problem is that even though I'm a scholar and I've known them and I've been friends with them, maybe that's part of the problem for so long, that I just felt overwhelmed with the material. I didn't know how to approach that material. And there was just so much of it, how to approach it as a book. And then, so we had all of these things. We had my writing about them. We had all of these archival materials. And then we had, we decided then, Alexei and I talked it through, and we decided to make a 20-minute or so, I mean, we have many, many hours, but edit it down to 20 minutes where they talk about some of the things that they've done in their life together. And so, as Alexei says, you can watch that. But then there's these articles, these essays I've been writing, and they are dense and they're scholarly because that's what I am. I'm a scholar, and I try to give the context, and I try to give what's important about it and what's innovative about it, and yet the traditions and blah, blah, blah. So not everybody wants to read that. So now I'm in a position where my scholarship, which has been my pride and my reason for being for so many years, is now a drop-down option. You can read it and I'll read it. It's optional in this book, right? Rather than my books were about, oh my God, these are my precious words and my great ideas, right? So that's a kind of a interesting kind of a place to be. And then down below that, you can, again, drop down if you want, or go visit the archive. So you can read all of the materials, you can see all of the videos, you can pull up the pages in her school book, Jesusa's school book when she was very young, and she would put, women's heads on male bodies and male heads on women's bodies, and have her own mishmash sense of gender and all her fabulous stuff. Or you can hear Liliana's music, or you can do all of that. So it's incredibly rich. So we said, well, how do you do it? So we designed it like a pyramid. The little piece on the top would be the video, the larger piece below would be the written stuff, the mass below would be all of this archival material. So now we have an archive that we're animating, that we're performing, if you want, in a way, because we're putting it in context with these other points of entry. But I think that one of the points that Alexei's been making, but one of the things that we've been very acutely aware of, and especially when we see all the people who come to the Hemispheric Institute and want to work with books and their different ideas about who these books are for, is that our readers are very different now. We're not counting with the reader that would have bought a book, even 10 years ago. So how are we keeping up with our readers, and how are we luring those who are so used to the visual that maybe after seeing the video say, oh my God, this is really interesting, and I want to read more about it. So it's just forced a different form of thinking about scholarship.
Even 3 years ago, people weren't reading on their phones. I mean,
Right.
I was amazed to be like, you could read on that thing? I mean, that's like, now I'm doing it all the time. It's just amazing. You know, one thing we sort of butt heads against when we're trying to sort of get, like one example, I would say butting heads. This was a great project with the Art Bulletin, with the College Art Association. But there was a pitch almost to say, let's try to establish a Scalar. This was done in Scalar, and let's get the Art Bulletin interface in this sort of 21st century interactive sort of environment. And there was this very sort of like, well, how do we deal with this? How do we preserve this type of thing for the next 100 years, right? So when you're working with institutions, there's always this concern about the next 100 years, right? And this is a sort of an old approach. Well, publishing and the print and all of this is all set. But how would we do something like this if you can't, preserve this for 100 years? And the sort of question that always comes to my mind is, 3 years ago, nobody was reading on a phone. Now everybody's reading on a phone. Imagine in 10 years, what is a screen? Are we even going to have screens, right? So what does this mean, this 100 years? We're in this really funny place right now where things are changing so fast that it's a hard battle to sort of try to get these things established for real, because there's the very disconnect between what's happening on the ground with students and what's the overarching. But this, just to come back to this, is a really nice project, a centennial celebration of the Art Bulletin, where we contextualize all of the work within years and created this sort of timeline that was the interface. So in many regards, this timeline became the table of contents, right? And your way of approaching this material. Another piece...
Well, I think our time is up, actually.
Oh.
So I was, don't you think?
We're close. You have a
Yeah, so we have time for discussion.
Should we talk about this real quick or no?
Sure.
2 seconds? Yeah.
2 seconds,
So,
because this is beautiful too.
right. Another
Different,
application,
yeah.
we're talking about digital books, is one of my experiences that getting more and more people that are interested in museums, galleries, or what they're writing about is collections of work. So where does it become a gallery and where does it become a book, and where is that line drawn? And so Mark Johnson, who was one of the curators of one of these collections, sort of coined this term curated pathways, which is sort of an elegant way of talking about these sort of books. There are these curated paths. But this is a virtual museum that pulls off of this is also done in Scalar, and this is sitting on top of a series of archives that are all over the world, pulling in that work, allowing people, curators of different collections, to come in, make a pathway, and have it interact with the rest of the museum. So the museum looks at the tags and the geolocations and the artists that are involved in each module. And so you read each module as a sort of a curated path or essay or whatever. And then the museum's goal in itself is to illustrate through data visualizations. Like, if you're interested in this artist, you click and it'll show you all the modules they're brought up in, all the different locations where they're featured, all the art that they've done that's part of this collection. So it's dynamically looking at all the contents of all the collections within the museum and allowing people to sort of navigate it that way. So another application for these types of online programs. So I'll just leave it there. I guess we could open up to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I was remiss in my opening remarks in not mentioning the hashtag, which I see everyone's already jumped on anyway, but I want to just say again, please, if you have questions, add them to Remix Scholar, and I'll try and follow along and add any questions. I have several questions of my own, but I want to see if there are people who are anxious to get us started with questions. Yes, Polly.
Well, you started with that interesting question about, what raised a question about preservation with your early projects and things that had run, and what about preservation of these things? How hard is it to preserve an entire multifaceted piece of work on Scalar or Tome?
Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking about that?
Oh, yeah.
It's sad that you're a drop down. Just think like 10 years when it's like,
Not even that.
You're a drop down in another drop down that's been forgotten, right? No, I mean, the preservation is an interesting thing. For one, I mean, like, let's just talk about today's presentation and bringing up this laptop, and she had everything on Firefox, and I'm like, I want to use Chrome because I haven't done full testing on some of these things across browsers. So I install Chrome, or she had Chrome already in here, which it wasn't even up on the dock. So I pull up Chrome, and it didn't have all the latest plugins. So now it doesn't recognize these types of files. It's not playing even a Vimeo file. So the idea of preservation is an interesting thing because I think on one level, it's very easy to store the data, to preserve the data, right? I mean, with cloud and with all this kinds of stuff, I've got files that I've forgotten about that I started 20 years ago with DreamHost that I look at, I'm like, it's still there. It's like, there's no way I can really play it, right? It's like some file it's like, there's no way I can really play it. Right? It's like see something and find it. So the preservation, we're definitely concerned about that. But I think, one of the issues really is, what are you preserving? I mean, when you're talking about a nonlinear book or these sort of tag relational ways of navigating through these databases, all that work, all that material still exists. It's all there. But your phone is now a different thing, and you're using gestures all the time, and you never hit another button, and that was designed for buttons. So the issue really becomes more about the technology that wraps around it, and our user habits. That becomes, I think, the biggest preservation. And there's something that we've been toying with, and I know other people have too, is to really focus back to the metadata. That the metadata is the key to preserving these, because Scalar might not be around in 100 years, and WordPress won't be around in 100 years, and nothing will that we know of. That we know of. I mean, these
Sunshine there.
Mr. Sunshine will be around. Sure, but things will be vastly different. But so how do you say? Well, how do you read that Scalar book? From 2012. Well, if you have the metadata that shows you, not just stuff like, your basic EXIF type of things like author and what file type, but also what tags were it in relation to this book, and what pages were it on, and what was it featured in, and what was it commented on, and what was that comment. And if all of that metadata gets baked in to each of the files, so I'm not just talking about the photos, but the videos and the annotations and the pages, right? Then what you have is something that's meaningful, because then even though you don't have a device that's like Scalar, you see all these relationships, and you could therefore theoretically recreate that exact same nonlinear experience with any type of weird gestural thing, right? So
and then you can migrate them, right? So we're looking at everything being migratable. So you're not getting attached to any one platform, and I think it's a mistake to get attached to a platform. But I think that the most important thing is how to reestablish the relationship between these materials and where they live and how they speak to each other. So if we can do that, then even if it's in a different place, hopefully you'll still have the video, hopefully you still have the drop-down essay, and hopefully you'll still have the archive. Now, I think the archive is pretty stable. Libraries has found a way to kind of stabilize that. But it's everything that we use to access it, which is not stable.
You're talking about tags before. Do you allow visitors, users, and I don't know what the right term is, readers, to tag and to comment? That's my first question. My second question is, you talked about social justice and providing access, and my concern is, as these books become more complicated with multimedia, they potentially become less accessible to those who actually should be able to have access to them.
Right. If you don't have internet, you don't have a book, right? So there's definitely access issues at play. But to the first question, which I'll answer, and then maybe you answer the second, but we allow comments. I think ultimately, it would be great to be able to tag and open up. We're talking about networks, right? I mean, you start to be able to tag this page in a book with this page in another book or in a gallery, and then have some model that looks at these tags and these relationships. I mean, that's awesome. That's where we're headed. Right now, there's no sort of, we're using tags in a very limited way in the book. So a tag becomes basically we look at a book, we've written the book has been written, it's there, and we say, what are the themes what are the underlying currents that we're talking about here? We're talking about race, we're talking about history, we're talking about, gender, right? These are underlying currents. Let's list them, and they become the tags. And then these tags are categorized, so geographies, politics, people, media, these are the these are the categories of tags, and then you tunnel into one of them, and you see the other tags. That's the way that we're using them. So that we're using them as a way to sort of visualize a volume. And in that model, you don't really allow other people to tag. We do allow other people to comment. And it's funny because I always, when I'm working with scholars, I'm like, do we turn on the comments or not? And they're always like, oh my God, no. And, and it's like, they're like, people could say really horrible things. And this is my dissertation. And that could mean that I don't, this could be like the end of my life. So, the comments is a tricky thing. In theory, it's, Kevin Kelly always talks about, if you can create a community around anything, you're gonna. And so one thing that I'm really interested in, and we all are, and obviously the folks at Scalar too, are creating communities around these books. And you do that by discussion and by inviting people to do things like tagging and having their own. So we're at a place right now where people are just afraid, I think, and there's got to make that big step into putting a book out there that everybody can comment on, and let's just see what happens.
We're doing a halfway measure that we're experimenting with now, which is called the Hemi Bookshelf. And so we're creating this bookshelf that has room for all of these publications. And we will have interviews with authors. We will have comment section. We will have office hours.
Related media,
all of that stuff on the bookshelf. And the bookshelf will be curated, which means if somebody says something really horrible about it, we're not going to post it. But anything that's a serious thorough reflection about what the materials are will be posted and shared and so forth. And that way we're creating something that's not part of the book itself, so it doesn't open up the book in ways that maybe will destabilize the materials, but it will allow to create what we wanted, as Alexei said, this community around the books. And as I said, my investment in this was always to really let's have artists and scholars and activists talking to each other across the Americas. That's a very specific project, right? It could be much, much bigger, or it could be organized in any different direction. But, that's something that we can keep in touch with the Twitter feed. We can keep it in touch with our Facebook. We can be putting out things and questions and prompts. And so that is something we can keep alive with all of these other ways, and then keep bringing people back to the bookshelf that we're developing.
Do you want to speak to the social justice question about access and the complexity?
Well, access it's so imperative in the Americas, first of all, to understand, I think, that people don't have access to what others are doing or thinking. So if I asked you to name, an author in Colombia besides Garcia Marquez, right, people would probably be stumped. Or who has done what in terms of activism besides maybe the mothers of Plaza de Mayo? Again, you may be stumped, right? But a lot of people are involved in issues of social justice throughout the Americas, and they don't know each other, and they feel very isolated from each other. So when we started Hemi back in 1998, it was basically a network to put all of these folks together, which we grounded in universities. As a way of stabilizing it. So we have, I think, 45 university members throughout the Americas, from Canada, literally the Arctic, down to Patagonia in Argentina and Chile. And we have about 25 different cultural centers. So we have centers like, for example, in Cuba, that could not join as a university, but they could join as a cultural center. We have cultural centers in Bolivia, where again, the university is not in a position to join. So we have very, very broad coverage. And one of my aspirations right now, my big hope, is to try to get some really great educational materials. And I would love to, Kathy Davidson and I have talked about maybe at some point partnering up on this, really great educational materials trilingually throughout the Americas on issues of human rights, on issues of immigration, on issues of language and language rights. If we think about how many languages we're losing, we have 56 indigenous languages in Mexico, but those are getting lost, by the day. So, and that's throughout. So there's so many issues. And then the other thing that I think we need to discuss, and not here today, but it's a big issue, is that English has become the lingua franca of the internet, always was, right? And so now that we're using these technologies to try to create, if you want, a different kind of a platform for interaction, on another level, we're again reinscribing some of the issues of colonial domination or imperial domination. That is what we're trying to work away from. So, every single one of these relationships has to be explored and examined. And that's why I said I think it's very important that humanists or scholars are driving the bus, and not just the technology Google people or, who can do this, probably very quickly and for very little money. And for them, $45,000 is not an issue. But they're not going to be spending it on translation, right? So I think all of the ethical issues and issues of access and issue of what people need to know across the Americas and what do we need to know about the Americas in order to understand what's going on here, and vice versa. For me, these are crucial issues, and these are very crucial times, right, to work on that. So we're developing all sorts of, and that's why the telephone is so important for us, because everybody, all migrants have telephones. Right, you may not have internet access, but so we're working on that. That's another big initiative we have.
Mobile apps.
Yeah. Mobile apps.
Yeah, so I want to take the conversation in a slightly different direction. I want to follow up on two things. One thing that you each said, but tied together. So I want to follow up on two things. One thing that you each tied. The scholar needs structure in these new environments like Scalar. And Diana, you said scholars need new skills, and I wanted to ask Lex if you wouldn't mind showing us maybe the back end of Scalar, just
Absolutely.
for people who haven't seen
sure.
that.
Yeah.
And then while you're calling that up, Diana, I wanted to ask you, what motivates you to learn new skills, and what are the rewards and challenges for scholars who want to enter these environments when maybe these are not rewarded in the regular sort of traditional ways within an institution of higher learning.
Right. Well, I'm very lucky because I don't need any more institutional rewards. So I'm in a privileged position, but I think, for junior scholars who know a lot more about technologies than I do, the issue of rewards is very serious, which is one of the reasons that we've done the digital book series with Duke. One of the disadvantages of doing something with a press is it has to go through review, it takes forever, some books you can turn around very quickly, especially when they're very important and like this, but the other takes, how long it takes to publish a book. This is how long it takes to publish a digital book. Meanwhile, the links, you can't publish it, you can't push the thing and close it off and so forth. So for me, it's urgent because I have seen what I do as a scholar also a part of my activism. And I see my activism as part of my scholarship. And so I've tried very hard to see myself as somebody or to act like somebody who is involved in the world and engaged with some of the issues that are challenges for us. So the digital technologies for me are, I need them. I've always known I've needed them, and I don't necessarily have the skills. I certainly don't have the technical skills. But what I do have, and what's been very useful for me, is I started out my life as a theater director. So I'm very visually driven. And I need, and I was just saying to Polly before we started, one of my colleagues just did the Museum of the History of Jews in Poland, which was opened on October 28th. It's massive, it's fantastic, it's incredible. And she was my colleague in performance studies and is also a very famous person in the museum world. That museum is a performance studies project, and she uses very, very few objects. So it's all done through digital technologies. I brought some images, but we don't have time, and that will be another day. But I called the piece that I was going to talk about performing scholarship, which is the way that you lay out, the way she does in this museum, all of these possibilities. You're entering into the 15th century. Well, all of the possibilities, the debates, everything is there. She's using these books, old manuscripts, which has been digitized, and they're animated. Mm-hmm. So you've got all these school kids, and they're looking at them, and they're, doing their gesture thing, and they're doing this, and they're moving, and they're going, and they're exploring, and then you walk to the next gallery, and there's other questions, and so you don't know at the beginning where this is going to end, as opposed to a traditional historical museum, which is, the Holocaust is coming, right? And it's going to be a Holocaust museum, and all this is going to end in terrible, terrible death camps that they had all over Poland, and and that's not that's not the lesson you take from this. The Holocaust becomes like this finite thing, and all the way along you see places where people could have made different choices, and people could have had different outcomes, and those are the lessons we need to learn. Not that this is inevitable, these horrible things happen, but that what leads to them, what could we have done differently so we don't do this again, and so forth. So the way that scholarship gets enacted and put out in the world requires a different way of thinking about our scholarship. And for one, that it's not a private, isolated venture. I see scholarship as collaborative. I see it as, by definition, communicative. If I can't communicate with you, what is the point, for me, of my scholarship? I need you to be able to read me, to understand, not to think, oh my God, what is the meaning of this word, and go crazy trying to decipher, So there's a way in which I think we're entering into a moment, which Alexei has talked about, that people are learning in a very different way. Mm-hmm. So if we're not thinking about the circulated production and circulation, and as Paul says, preservation of knowledge in different ways, and another time when we have more time, I'd like to go back to the issue of preservation, because ultimately, I think preservation can mean lots of different things, and maybe I know that we need to focus on it all the time, and we do. But at the same time, I think maybe if we fetishize objects so much, instead of thinking about these as conversations that are taking place in a moment through all of these different media, and what we're getting out of that, and what are we learning now that we're taking forward with us, then maybe we haven't valorized enough what the experiential, conversational kind of understanding, coming to understanding of education is. Because like a textbook is out of date, right? I mean, a lot of the stuff that we deal with is out of date, and we're not worried about preservation in that sense. So how is it that these other technologies are actually opening up different ways of understanding and communicating that are not being achieved through other forms? So,
great. You want to take us a little bit through the back end and just show us a couple of tips and tricks?
Yeah, so this is just sort of a right out of the box Scalar. I'd set it up for a webinar on October 30th, I guess probably a couple years ago. But the general, I'm missing something here, am I not? The general interface has a few things. You can create new pages from wherever you are, from the front end. So this is the front end, there's nothing here, but I could go and create a new page, or I could edit this page. All right, this...
I don't know what's happening.
I don't know what's happening. What is binary system? Leave this page. Okay. I'm just going to do a quick thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I also do, webinars online, and I'm available to help folks. So if somebody was interested, I could do this over a Google Hangout. But the sort of overview things, you can add titles and descriptions. You can write here. There's actually something wrong with this browser, because there's things that are not being featured here. I can see. The WYSIWYG, right, the editor, so that's not appearing here. This is something that's but you can author in HTML, you can author like you traditionally would in Microsoft Word, if anybody ever uses that still.
Cut and paste.
Yeah. You can copy. No comment. Relationships. So here you can make this page a part of a path, so string it into a collection of things, like a chapter basically. And it's funny because, Tara and the team of Scalar, I guess I'll include myself there, has always been sort of these adamant, supporters of the nonlinear and the exploratory and these sort of alternate relationships. But one funny thing that I always look at Scalar, I'm like, what are the things it's actually done that I don't think anybody else has ever done is allow to easily make pages linear. I mean, you string them together. I mean, the whole nature of the web is that it's non-linear. You have a navigation, and your navigation is supposed to always allow anyone to get anywhere at any time, right? And so here you're actually pulling it back, and you're saying, no, there's a curation, and there's a process for reading this that the author is taking you through. So aside from all these other things, it allows you to do that through paths. So anyways, here you can create a path. You can make this page a comment. You can annotate. You can add tags. There's various tagging things you can do. There's also my favorite part, the custom CSS and JavaScript, so you can add any kinds of functionality. Let me just go up here to the dashboard. So this is like, the dashboard like you'd see in WordPress or Joomla. Here you can manage all your users. You can manage sharing things. So how is it public? How do people review this type of stuff? Here's a list of all your pages. I have 0 pages, but this would be the list of my pages. All of my media here. So anything that I've uploaded to Scalar, anything that I've sort of, like I said, imported or referenced from Critical Commons or Hemispheric Institute or any online archive would be featured here. All the paths, right? So all the pages that I've created as a path will be featured here. Then tags, anything that's been tagged, annotations, comments, so on. There's also in the book property something I skipped, but here you're able to load new themes, right? So if you wanted I actually did a few of these. They're pre-made CSS packages. So if you wanted to look a certain way, you can load one of these themes.
You mean you created those?
I created these themes, yeah. I mean, they're different looks. So like, I'll just show you one here really quickly. But while I'm doing this, while I'm showing this, your question to me was that I thought that all scholars should become directors. You can see the typeface is different. There's not a whole lot of content here. So, but I don't really mean that everybody should learn directing. But the point is, when you start working with all of this rich media, and you start working with paths, and you start working with tags, and you start working with photos, well, the amount of times somebody gives me, oh, here's all the photos. And I'm like, the photos are this big. Do you realize that? Nobody can look at them. So, well, now you have to have a knowledge of photography, some basic digital, right? What does 300 pixels actually mean in terms of looking at something on the web, right? People send me a TIFF file that's, 40 megabytes, so a lot of time, there's no concept of what these files actually are, what they're used for, how to optimize them. And then take that a step further and say, well, you're going to have video. There's like all kinds of stuff that goes into video. For one, just the fact that, we're so used to these CDNs like, YouTube and Vimeo that do all the work for you. But Firefox doesn't play like an MP4. It plays like an OGG. And Safari plays, another one. And so there's a million file types, and then, what's the bit rate and what's the size and is it HD and does it use something that won't be played on an iPhone? So all of a sudden the skills that you need to be aware of are kind of like, they just grow and they continue to grow and grow. And so there's this sort of funny line of, on one end, here's something that's a great tool to be able to write your own book, but also think about what kind of technology you're going to utilize and what that means. So, yeah. And you can look also just at some of the stuff in the dashboard of Scalar where you say, well, here's tags, but do you really know how you can best use tags to support your scholarship, right? So there's just a lot to also learn.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, hi. First I just want to say it's a really impressive looking content management system, and thanks for personally introducing it. That always helps me get a better feel for how these things work. I'm currently developing a platform off of WordPress, and that is basically due to lack of resources. It's easier to develop off of WordPress. I'm really curious what led you guys to make the decision to build a content management system from scratch. What led you to that?
That's a great question. First of all, I was hired by Scalar after it was already made. Okay. So I sort of ended up working, because I've worked with WordPress and I work with these content management systems and I work with scholars and I'm used to the way that they operate and I understand very well their limitations to technology, and so it was a nice fit. for me, but I didn't develop Scalar. But the intention with Scalar is actually very interesting in that WordPress is very hierarchical. Everything attaches to something else, right? So everything is a custom post type, and within there you've got media files get associated with a post, and so on and so forth. Scalar is looking at it from a completely different thing. It's got a sort of a relational database, and it's saying, if I set Scalar on top of an archive, who's to allow me to create some sort of hierarchy, right? I'm not. In fact, in Scalar, everything that you add, whether it be a photo or a video or a comment or a page that has just text or a page that has, it's its own element. The database sees it the same. It doesn't care. It's just an element. We call it a page and we call it a photo. Scalar doesn't see that. It just sees the element. And that is interesting because it allows you to, or the scholar, the author, to arrange things in interesting ways and piece things together in a way that is sort of much broader and sort of more complex and open than something you could do in WordPress.
And does that facilitate the vectors or the paths that you were talking about?
Right, exactly. So a path doesn't have to just be pages. It could be media, and then a comment could be part of a path. So you can really sort of break open this box of like what you can do. So
But
yeah, that's why
we developed our own.
Right. So the reason we developed our own is very much because we did the same thing with Tome, which you saw. That's a theme and a series of plugins that we made. We all actually made the plugins ourselves, even though some of them exist already. But the point is, preservation. You upgrade WordPress, and these guys over here didn't upgrade their plugin, and now you've got something that doesn't work. So we made everything ourselves so that we control all of that. And we also don't have the resources and the time to build our own. And not only that, I don't want to reinvent the wheel with how to upload a media file, right? That opens up all kinds of problems, right? WordPress already does it, and it's great. And so we've built our stuff off of WordPress also, but we're also playing the WordPress game, which I don't think is a bad game. People really love it. But Scalar is really attempting to do something really new, which is, start in a whole other approach, a democratic, non-hierarchical approach to authoring, and see where that leads us.
But the thing is that, we were much more visually driven. We are much more visually driven because we do work with so many artists and we do work with so many activists. And they wanted, the kinds of visuals you saw in Tone, right? You wanted those big visuals. And, we have another book on Berry Borba, who is this artist from Brazil. And he wanted the huge, great big video, and he wanted it to come much more immersive and all of that. And so Tome allows for that, and Scalar still, as I say, it's a different audience. It's not that you don't have videos in Scalar, but you saw the size, right? Now I think they're finally getting bigger with this new version. Am I right?
Right. So I'm now working to redesign. So it's been 5 years, basically, working with Scalar and learning and seeing how people use it, what tools people use. And it's completely changed sort of the view of what are we doing with this. So we're in a state, it's super exciting right now. Just been meeting all week with the developers because I'm doing the user interface, the whole new design of Scalar. So it's going to be a completely different look that really sort of addresses the sort of 5 years of working with scholars and seeing what people use, get things bigger, get things more sort of full screen, get things more gestural, right? Look at the sort of ways and the trends that are happening, the way that people are actually. You can if you look at like Style Boost or any like award-winning, something that features award-winning sites, they all look the same. There are things that are working right now that everybody is using. It's important that you stay in that game, especially when you're working with students, because students look at something and they're like, that is old and that sucks, right? That's just sort of like, I don't want to use something that looks like I've got to write in Wikipedia, right? So not always, but there's the aesthetic becomes the way, even scholars. The second you work on something lives on the internet, you're playing by those rules. And things need to look awesome, right? And even if it's deep, rich, scholarly stuff, it needs to look wow factor.
I'm crazy. We're doing a book right now, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. I see it as a play. I say, okay, it's got 3 acts. It's going to do 1, 2, 3. We have to build it this way. We have to move through the space. So when We're here, this is the text you read, this is what you see, we're moving over here, you're gonna see something else, you're gonna read something else, you're gonna go over here. There are all of these different steps, and then I'm gonna take you through it the next time, and it's gonna be with headphones, and you're gonna have audio, and you're gonna go back to the same places you've already seen, but this time you're gonna see it this way, and then next time you're gonna do it this other way. And so for me, it's like, it's gone to, I need more space, you know, I don't fit into the little.
You're becoming a director now.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I need to use the digital the way I would use, but it's scholarly and it's site-specific and it's, you know, and so I get sort of these crazy visions and then we have to enact them because that's just how it is, you know? I mean, ever since when they said to us at the beginning, you can't put video online. We were the first people to put video online. Can you believe that? And that was with the help of Mellon. He said, what do you mean you can't put video online? Of course you have to be able to put video online. Well, okay.
Maybe the first in academia.
Well, the first in
That was a broad, that was a big.
This was way before YouTube. No,
truth.
this was way before because
Yeah.
Mellon had just funded the JSTOR project.
That was a long time ago.
A long time ago. They had just funded ArtStore and we were their first video project for putting video online. And so, I mean, that was way back in the day and it didn't always look the way it looks now. But it was like, you know, we need to have that, otherwise we can't talk to other folks. So, you know, it's been like trying to push to get the stuff that we need and then see how we do it, right? So that's been a long conversation, always with us.
Question all the way in the back and then here.
Hi, I'm Amanda Castro, a student here at the Graduate Center. I have my students at NYU doing design fiction projects right now, so they're creating new writing technologies. So my question for you is, what's next? Right? Where do you see the future of word processing writing technologies going?
That's all. Yeah, I mean, so. Yeah, I was just jotting down with little stickums a couple days ago. So I'm working on an app that's for sort of like authoring, location-based authoring. And we were talking about, well, how do we apply these types of things to our authoring and our students? And we've been working with sort of free open access authoring classes, modules, courses. And so, you know, one thing that I've been toying with is these apps or these writing modules that are thinking about collaborative writing, right? So how would you actually write collaboratively? And I don't mean like Google Docs where it's like, oh, I see you're writing now, and then I'm gonna write here, and we can comment on the side, and we've got something.
Yeah.
That's all, I mean, I love it. It's great, it's totally great. Unfortunately, they don't have rich media and tags and all this stuff, so they're really off the game also. There's nobody that's really on the game. But I think taking it next step further, one thing I keep noticing, and scholars I'm sure gonna sort of, you know, scoff at this, but limitations. When you work online, when you work with an app, limitations are actually what makes them successful. You have 140 characters, you have only one photo, you know, you've got 7 seconds, right, on your Vine, and people eat that up, right? When you have no limitations, people go mad. You go crazy because you're like, I could do this or that or this or that, and I never do anything. So just say, well, how about just do something in 5 seconds or write 5 words? People can do that. So I've been thinking about a way in which you have a classroom and you give people, I don't know what to call them, tickets, pages that are, I'm just making all this up right now, but let's say they're 300 words. And there's only 2 things you can do with them. Or let's say 3 things, I don't know. You can add a photo. No, let's say, no, forget it. There's a ticket, and they can be 2 different things. They could be a piece of media or a piece of text. And the piece of text can only be 300 characters. And it can only do 2 things. It can only continue on to somebody else or reference somebody else halfway through it. So here I'm talking about Joe, who's another classmate. Fine. But at the end of reading this, I can go, I'm going to link to, you know, Jose. Those are the 2 things you can do. Now you get everybody to write one and see what that relationship happens. So mine I'm writing, and actually, you know what, I'm not referencing anybody. I'm just going to continue on to, and I'm going to read everybody else's, and this is interesting what they're talking about. Mine's somewhat similar. In fact, I like what they're doing. I'm going to change mine a little bit to sort of, to segue nicely onto theirs. Now I continue on to this person's. That person's continues on to somebody else, but also references this. What is that reference? Well, that was not a text, that was an image. And then you start to see, wait, I wanted to say something else. Fine, write another ticket or page that's your 300 characters and add it to the mix. And now, I don't know. I mean, I've never done. I had these little stickums on the wall, trying to like think, what would this look like, and what would the linearity be, or would it just be like literally looking at a wall, which I don't think people like. But whatever. I don't know. That's something. I mean,
You mean more of network visualization?
yeah, right.
And I was thinking, well, go ahead. No, you see, this is what happens, and that's how we get ideas. Because I want to do this with the migrants.
Yeah.
And with all of those folks who are, trying to move through, which goes back to our social justice project, attaching it to that mapping thing that you did, right? Mm-hmm. And there, so locate myself. I'm here, and this is what I'm seeing, and these are some photographs of what's happening. And you're over here, and this is what you're seeing, and this is what, a photo or whatever, and then try really to get a real view of what the hell is happening out there and who's doing what, and you could do it with almost anything, right? Anyway, but that's just an aside.
So the comment about the museum brought me into thought. In the spring, I had new graduate students at Hunter do a visit to Rubin Museum of Art. It's a Himalayan art.
Yeah.
It was an exhibit called The Art of Tibetan Medicine. You would do a 500-word essay for extra credit. And I did a hermeneutic study of this, and I pulled in one piece of art from it. I thought it was pretty cool, but it looks kindergartenish now compared to what you just talked about. And I was wondering, how would you take it to the next step? So it was a temporary exhibit, but it was a very engageable exhibit at the museum. You had to figure out what humor you had, which so bile or whatever the Tibetan thing is. And then throughout the exhibit, you could have this experience for your own health behaviors, where you eat the right foods, the right spices, the right colors in the environment. So the students really got into it. But it was a short-term thing, and it was a permanent exhibit. I did get permission to use a couple of the images in the publication. An interesting online version, I can do color, but in the paper version, I can do black and white.
Huh.
But I did develop my own mandala, using a nursing theory perspective on their experience. So my question was, if you could move it into a digital format. Mm-hmm. With museums, particularly a temporary exhibit, obviously you have to get permission to recreate some of this. But how do you engage the reader? Maybe you can do this online. Again, like they did at the museum, they figure out what their own rumors are and therefore what foods and behaviors should they be doing to be in balance, because that's what it was about. How would you approach that on a web page? And can I still do it? Or next time,
right?
Can I do it on both? Paper, but also the new digital version.
I'm kind of at a loss. I'm totally. I'm trying to. Are you trying to find something that that makes you think?
It just made me think of it. But let me just see. Can you bring up the view?
Yeah.
I'll just give you a little example. I don't know if this is. I want to see the slide or slideshow. Just a little PowerPoint thing.
Oh, our PowerPoint.
Yeah, that was almost there.
Okay. Yeah, there we are.
Okay,
There we go.
so view, and then let me see if I can find it. I mean,
Do you want me to navigate here?
Yeah, if you could. Go. I mean, I don't know if this is anything of these.
So I want them to have a different worldview, right? Think outside their
so here,
framework.
Here, for example, I just came back from Warsaw. I was just telling Polly last night at midnight. So this is so fresh in my brain. But anyway, so this is Barbara Cushman-Black-Gimlet that I told you about, who did this museum. And so here's the book. These are, very, very rare books. Nobody would ever be able to touch them. So these are all digital replicas. And then you go in and you can, move through them, and you can learn all of these other things. So here it's all the gesture stuff, right? And then this, I don't know if this works because,
No, right here.
right here? Because I can't see, but anyway, see if you can get going. We don't want sound on this, I just want it to move.
Oh. Looks like a sound thing here.
It is, I don't know, it just said to.
Yeah, it's not.
Oh, this is too bad because, anyway, so she took this old book, many, but, and she animated the images in them. So the images are all animated. So you have these woodcut things that were in, 17th or 16th century manuscripts, and they're all moving and everybody's doing their tasks. And here are all the kids who are sitting around actually looking at everything. So the whole museum is like this, right? So everything is about this interactivity and everything is the engagement with the digital. And just what I was saying before, that here's the street scene and you go in and there's all these different things happening. But this idea always of the experience and of options and that you're interacting with the materials and that you could have made different choices. You know, you could have gone here rather than there, and what happens when you go there and so forth. So I just think that there's so many ways in which you can think of scholarship as animated, right? As opposed to something that's dead and over already and full of possibilities rather than something that's already been foreclosed. And where we have students who are engaged in thinking about those possibilities and what those choices are, and maybe what are the choices that we're facing today that might be comparable, right? So what are the crossroads? What are the decisions and debates? Where are we? Well, let's plan it out. Let's think it through in an animated way. So I don't know if this speaks, but the way it's going into so many different arenas of scholarship, right? Not just traditional writing of books, but museum studies, and I think Alexei showed you visual studies, the galleries that are being made for the
virtual museum,
the virtual museums.
Yeah, a little bit we looked at that. Yeah.
Right. So it's just affecting so many areas that I would just say what's I don't know the expression in English, but something like the horse is out of the stable or something. Right. I mean, we're not holding this back. The question is how do we use it best in the most ethical, empowering, educationally rich way, right? To help our students make sense of the world or engage.
Great questions. Who else? Somebody else that hasn't spoken have questions? In the back?
This is sort of oblique because when I saw your presentation on the use of multimedia in your books, in the sense of using audio and video snippets, it seemed to me that there's a move from the subjects of our study being silent to actually gaining more prominence through being directly represented in our books, because their voice, the audio brings their voice out directly. Video, you have so much more dimensions of the study being brought out in the scholarship. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts about how the credits for authorship should reflect that change in the role of the subjects of the study.
That's definitely something we're always, how do we give credit? We make this book that's got, interviewing, talking with this guy, and these guys are playing in the background, and there's a kid runs back over here, and, I coded some stuff, but we also had an intern that uploaded, and, I designed, and then of course there's the author who wrote, and then there's the videographer, the editor. So it's just it's like a production. We just have a contributors page. It's the author is the scholar, and that's great. And then,
but even in my book,
that's changing. Right?
In my book with these artists, with these two women artists, I say that it's a collaboration, which again is interesting, right? Because I'm not the objective scholar that I am in quote some of my other books. Not that anybody's ever objective, but you know what I'm saying. But this is actually an engagement and a conversation. That's a very different thing. And I think that you're absolutely right. When subjects speak for themselves rather than become objects of analysis. But it's also very hard then for me to be critical. So how do I balance that without risking this old and very valuable friendship for me, right? So I found ways to do that, right? I frame arguments that are difficult arguments and they have no right or wrong answer. And they're in it, but there's other people who are in it and other people who have written about it or spoken about it or debates in which we were live present. And I bring all of those things in without saying, well, geez, what happens when you do some kind of an impersonation of somebody? I mean, if you're an actor, part of what you do is impersonation, right? So it becomes really fraught. But then what are the things you can't impersonate, and what are the limits, and what are the boundaries? And so all of that stuff then has got to be called into question without calling them necessarily. You can say so-and-so objected to this and so-and-so objected to that, you know, and on the other hand, they responded that this and this and this and this, and here, you know, rather than me saying, well, I think, you know, at the end of the day. So it puts you in a much more, I feel a much more responsible position because I have to respond to them and I have to respond to those arguments. I can't just say, well, whatever they say is fine. No, I mean, so I feel like I'm responding to a broader audience perhaps.
I have a somewhat related question, which is about the, you know, Kathy and lots of other people have talked about the affordances of technology and how they shape the way that we think. And just thinking about Scalar, and it seems to me that one of the crucial affordances of Scalar is the whole idea of paths, right? And how that, and I just wondered if either one or both of you could speak about paths and maybe some of the, you know, theory or research or data behind the idea that this is a better way of producing knowledge or acquiring knowledge or relating to knowledge.
Let me talk about that because I don't have a conflict of interest. We tried to use paths in the first Scalar book that we did, which was Holy Terrors. And in that, I don't know if you remember, but you follow the book. So you follow the print book, you know. But then we had indigenous performance, activist performance, and so forth. So there's different ways of accessing those materials. Well, so we sent that out for external review, like everything, you know, that goes through Duke. And we have our own review process, but it's the Hemi editorial board. But the Duke people, we don't know who those folks are. They said, well, but you know what? Each one of those paths was something that you could access somehow else in the book. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's a new problem now, right? So now we have to create original, specific material for the paths that are not part of the material for the rest of the book. So all of a sudden, I felt this is really onerous. Not only have we created the book, right, and made links, all of these different kinds of performance, and then made a path that puts these artists kind of in dialogue with each other because they're doing different kinds of performances or doing work, say, about indigenous performance or whatever. Now, there has to be something unique about each of those paths that is not part of the book as a whole. So now I have to create either introductions or video interviews or other things that's going to make this path singular. So then where do those paths live? Because those paths are then going to have to somehow intersect, mm-hmm. right? So all of a sudden, we have all of the people who are talking. Let's say I do interviews. Let's say I go that way. Mm-hmm. Okay, now all the interviews could be its own path, mm-hmm. right? Well, what's going to introduce that path? You know what I'm saying? So it seems like a good idea, and one of the reasons I got so thrilled by Scalar when I first encountered it was I thought, okay, well, these paths can give us so many thousands of ways through materials, which is what I've been looking for in trying to deal with all the materials in our archives. How do we access them? How do we get people to be able to see what's there? Well, we have this, we have that, we have that. But I just think that the expectations then from the reader with the digital so far is that there's going to be then something particular and specific, and the need then to keep creating and creating is never ending. Right? And one of the problems that we got to very early on, because that was our first book, the companion book, was it just never ended. And it got bigger. And so now if we're talking about indigenous performance, why don't I link it to all the other people who are not in the book? And all of a sudden we were like in this thing where we were just controlling huge amounts of material. And we said, no, this has got to end. So we cut it off to the book again.
Who said that?
You said it. You said it. But one thing leads to another. If you're following the path link, there's no end.
Well, what is a digital book is also one of the questions is if it's a website, one of the definitions of a website is it's never done.
Yeah.
It's always, update it later. Oh, sorry about this. I haven't yet got to update. So when we're calling them books, there is a point where you got to say, you know what, let's do version 2 later. And, volume 2 or another book. And, stop it and contain it.
It's a nice distinction. And sort of brings us back full circle to where we were.
One thing I want to say technically about the paths, though, which, you need to understand is that when you're writing in Microsoft Word, you just continue to write, and it paginates for you, right? It says every, whatever, 300 words, and there you are, and it moves on. And then it's like, okay, chapter done. Well, when you're on a web page, you come to a chapter that's, 47 pages long, and you look at this text thing that's like, I'm going to be scrolling for days and days and days. I'm not reading this, right? The rules of the web are short and easy to digest and fun to look at and so on. So you need to have a way of blocking, cutting things up, and yet keeping them linear, keeping them together as part of a sequence, right? So the path was, right? At the end of the day, it's just a function you sort of need in some capacity if you're going to be doing long form.
But now
reading.
we're doing, I mean, to be fair, in our own Scalar books, we're using one path.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's a way to scale them down, because the whole, well, we can have this path, and pretty soon we've got 15 paths, and then it's like, oh my God, how do we even, I don't even know.
You lose your way.
Right.
I mean, the reality is you lose your way in them. So like in one book that we finished, and these are all going out now because these have all been accepted, they've gone through the reader things and so forth. We have one beautiful book called Dancing with the Zapatistas. And we use my essay, my overall essay, as kind of an introduction to the whole thing. So there's links in my essay that will take you to the other chapters. So if you want to know about muralism and how the Zapatistas have told their whole story and everything through these murals, you can go to that, and it's another thing. So it could be like a little path, or I'm referring to these documents that the Zapatistas put out. You can go to them. And so forth, but they're also all listed separately in the table of contents, so you don't have to interrupt your reading, because the other problem with the paths is I'm on this path and, oh, that looks interesting, and there I'm gone, and it's like we couldn't find a way to keep the semblance of writing that was somehow discrete and understandable on its own. So Alexei tried to convince us, and I was convinced actually after we did this, that each piece has got to have its own integrity. And then it can intersect with other pieces, and you can find creative ways of saying, well, this discussion is actually taken up over here. But why not finish this essay and then go to this essay rather than, take a right and then a left and then...
Yeah, that's interesting. It raises interesting questions about the argument about the distraction economy and the attention economy and how we're all distracted and that sort of thing. But this is fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing this. And let's all thank our Again, I encourage you all to follow the discussion on Remix Scalar and Remix the Dis. There's a lot of interesting comments there as well.
Cool. Great.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Thank you
so much.